do centenarians eat? To study the lifestyle habits of our eldest elders, you first have to establish how old people really are. Centenarian science has long been plagued by rampant age exaggeration. According to the editor of the Guinness Book of World Records, no single subject is more obscured by vanity, deceit, falsehood, and deliberate fraud than the extremes of human longevity. It's a tale as old as time, dating back at least to biblical times, with boasts of patriarch Methuselah living to 969. One of the most famous blows to the credibility of studies of long-lived individuals was a 1973 cover story in National Geographic. It fascinated readers with this description of extraordinary rates of centenarians in the Caucasus region of the former Soviet Union, the Hunza Valley in Pakistan, and the village of Vilcabamba in Ecuador. Upon closer inspection, however, not only had none of the quote-unquote centenarians actually reached 100 years of age, but none of the so-called nonagenarians had even made it to 90. Given the age exaggeration, whether for social status or to promote local tourism, the average quote-unquote 100-year-old turned out to be 84. The debacle was eventually recognized and acknowledged by the physician-author, but not before casting a shadow over the entire field. Despite this inauspicious start, there are now more than a dozen major ongoing studies of actual centenarians that can offer insight into their exceptional longevity. Blue Zone's Food Guidelines. Careful checks have systematically invalidated nearly all claims of allegedly long-living populations as being inflated or undocumented, so we're left with 5 authenticated so-called blue zones, longevity hotspots named for the color a demographer used in a global heat map of mortality. The 5 generally accepted blue zones are the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, the island of Sardinia in Italy, Ikaria in Greece, Okinawa in Japan, and Loma Linda, California in the United States. These are the regions with high concentrations, up to 10 times the U.S. average, of centenarians and other seniors who have reached old age in good health and remain active members of the community. They share a number of lifestyle characteristics, including low smoking rates, daily moderate physical activity, social engagement, and nutrition-wise, they all center their diets around whole plant foods. Dan Buettner, the founder of the Blue Zones organization, along with a team of researchers, distilled findings from more than 150 dietary surveys from the world's longest-living people to create a set of 10 food guidelines. The foundation of the Blue Zones food guidelines is see that your diet is 95% to 100% plant-based. Vegetables are emphasized, especially leafy greens, along with fruits, whole grains, and legumes. The list ends with retreat from meat, noting that Blue Zone centenarians only eat about 2 ounces or less of meat about 5 times per month. Traditionally, people of the Blue Zones eat at least 90% plant-based, and the population with perhaps the highest life expectancy in the world, the Loma Linda Adventist vegetarians, don't eat any meat at all. Sidebar: the Blue Zones food guidelines. To follow in the footsteps of people with the longest lifespans and health spans, consider following the official Blue Zones food guidelines. Here they are, quote-unquote, 95 to 100% plant-based. Go wholly whole, by which they mean reduce intake of processed foods. Daily dose of beans, meaning 1 to 2 servings of beans, chickpeas, lentils, or split peas. Drink mostly water. Number 5 is snack on nuts. Number 6 is go easy on fish. Number 7, eliminate eggs. Number 8, slash sugar. Number 9, reduce dairy. And then, number 10, retreat from meat. Legume longevity. The emphasis on minimally processed plant foods is consistent with studies on long-lived persons that date back more than a century, including ones on modern-day centenarians. Of all plants, beans appear most often as the dietary cornerstone for centenarians, as well as for individuals throughout each of the Blue Zones. A paper entitled Legumes, the Most Important Dietary Predictor of Survival in Older People of Different Ethnicities, detailed a study in which researchers looked at 5 cohorts in Australia, Greece, Japan, and Sweden. Of the food factors investigated, the only one found to have consistent and significant association with a longer lifespan across the board was intake of legumes, whether it was Swedes eating their brown beans and peas, Japanese eating their soy, or Greeks eating their lentils, chickpeas, and white beans. The researchers identified an 8% reduction in risk of death for every 20-gram increase in legumes consumed each day, which is just about 2 tablespoons worth. This is consistent with data from the Global Burden of Disease study that found that of all foods considered, the largest lifespan gains would be expected from eating more legumes. In the United States, for more than a decade now, the federal government has aimed to encourage Americans to build healthy meals with its My Plate campaign, using the visual guide of a dinner plate. Vegetables and whole grains should fill most of it, and fruits and proteins should take up the remaining space. Legumes are given special treatment straddling both the protein and vegetable groups. Legumes are loaded with protein, zinc, and iron, as you'd expect from other protein sources like meat, while being naturally low in sodium and saturated fat, and they have 0 cholesterol. But they're also chock full of nutrients concentrated in the vegetable kingdom, like fiber, potassium, and folate, making beans among the best bargains for nutrition density per dollar. In Costa Rica, researchers found that those who ate beans every day had a 38% lower risk of heart attack compared to non-bean eaters, and this was after controlling for saturated fat and cholesterol, so it apparently wasn't just because they were eating beans instead of beef. Randomized controlled trials dating back as far as 60 years have proven that cardiovascular risk factors, such as cholesterol levels, blood pressure, and markers of inflammation, can be lowered simply by eating legumes, typically about a cup a day for 4 to 8 weeks. One study found that 2 daily servings of beans, chickpeas, lentils, and split peas cut cholesterol so much that many participants, aged 50 and older, fell out of the range that typically results in the prescribing of cholesterol-lowering statin drugs. Dozens of randomized controlled trials have found that soy can lower cholesterol and blood pressure, but compilations of more than 60 randomized controlled trials have found that other beans also lower cholesterol, as well as benefit blood sugars and lower insulin levels. Despite this overwhelming evidence, surveys suggest that most American consumers are unaware of the benefits. They just don't know beans. In some of the studies, beans replaced meat, which makes it impossible to tease out the effects of boosting beans versus moderating meat. Nevertheless, even interventional studies that pit beans, chickpeas, or lentils head-to-head against other healthy foods like whole grains show benefits in terms of cholesterol, blood pressure, and weight loss. One particularly instructive study added chickpeas to the diet for 5 months, which resulted in average total cholesterol dropping from levels typical in the Western world, around 206 milligrams per deciliter, down to about 160, which is close to the target of under 150. Interestingly, the study was performed in northern India, so the participants' cholesterol levels actually started out at an average of 123. Only after packing their diets with saturated fat were they able to raise their cholesterol to typical American levels in order to test out the effects of chickpeas. So while it would be better to just eat healthier in the first place, why not eat healthier with hummus, a diet low in saturated fat with lots of legumes? Reversing arterial disease with beans. Legumes are not interchangeable, though. A Venn diagram of the phytochemicals found in lentils, beans, soybeans, and chickpeas shared only a 7% overlap, so we should strive for variety. That's easier than ever before, given the variety of ways to enjoy them. Have you had pasta made from legumes? Substituting just 40% of the semolina flour in pasta for sprouted chickpea flour can significantly improve artery function within hours of consumption compared to regular pasta. Are the improvements we get from eating legumes enough to actually reverse arterial disease? Researchers looked at legumes and peripheral artery disease, which results from the buildup of atherosclerotic plaque that causes decreased blood flow down to the legs. The way the disease is diagnosed and monitored is with the ankle brachial index, the ratio of blood pressure of the ankle compared to the arm. If the index falls below 0.9, it indicates a clog in the flow of blood to your lower body. Researchers had 26 individuals with peripheral artery disease eat a half serving of beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils every day for a week, followed by 1 full daily serving for the next 7 weeks. After just 2 months of eating beans, the ankle brachial index of 4 participants jumped up into the normal range, The researchers concluded that, quote, a legume-rich diet can elicit major improvements in arterial function, unquote. The study didn't have a control group, but peripheral artery disease patients tend to get worse, not better. If you know my personal story, you may remember that my grandmother suffered from this disease. It was one of the reasons she was confined in a wheelchair waiting to die until her life was saved by evidence-based nutrition. That's what inspired me to dedicate my life to do for everyone's family what Nathan Pritikin did for mine. Slow your beating heart. In chemistry and physics, there are constants, physical quantities thought to be both universal and unchanging. Biology, though, was considered too complex and too messy to be governed by simple natural laws. In 1997, however, a theoretical high-energy physicist from Los Alamos joined two biologists to describe universal scaling laws that appear to apply across the board. For example, the number of heartbeats per lifetime is remarkably similar, whether you're a hamster or a whale. Mice, who typically live for less than 2 years, have a heart rate of about 500 to 600 beats a minute, up to 10 beats a second. In contrast, the heart of the Galapagos tortoise beats 100 times more slowly, but they live about 100 times longer. There's such a remarkable consistency in the number of heartbeats mammals get in their lifetimes that a group of researchers started to ask a provocative question. Can human life be extended by reducing the average heart rate? For further exploration, see my video c.nf/pulse. But the bottom line does seem to be that faster heart rate may lead to a faster death rate. We should shoot for an average resting heart rate of no more than 65 beats per minute, so a goal of about 1 heartbeat per second to beat the clock. Every 10 beats per minute increase in resting heart rate above about 65 beats per minute is associated with a 10 to 20% increase in the risk of premature death. Men with no apparent evidence of heart disease, who have a pulse of 90 beats per minute, had 5 times higher risk of sudden cardiac death compared to those in the apparent safety zone of less than 60 beats per minute. Resting heart rates around 90 beats per minute increase heart disease risk at a level similar to smoking. Thankfully, as I explained in my follow-up video, c.nf/heart rate, we can slow our pulse with pulses. Diabetics randomized to eat around a cup of beans, chickpeas, or lentils each day for 3 months not only experienced a significant improvement in blood sugar control, but a drop of 3 beats per minute in average resting heart rate, as much as a 12-week aerobic conditioning program of cycling, stair climbing, and running on a treadmill. All these short-term bean benefits appear to translate out in population studies to a decreased risk of heart disease, high blood pressure, obesity, and, most importantly, premature death. A single daily serving of beans, chickpeas, or lentils may be associated with a 10% decrease in all-cause mortality risk. The fact that the lowered risk was found even in studies that controlled for meat consumption suggests it's not just a substitution effect. A sidebar: beans, they're good for your heart. Sadly, only 1 in 25 Americans approaches even a single serving of legumes a day. Why aren't more people clamoring for beans? For some, it's fear of flatulence. Beans have been christened the musical fruit, but could that just be a lot of hot air? A randomized controlled crossover study put it to the test, and the researchers concluded that, quote, people's concerns about excessive flatulence from eating beans may be exaggerated, unquote. Study participants were randomized in separate trials to eat pinto beans, black-eyed peas, or vegetarian baked navy beans. During the first week, 35% reported increased flatulence, but that fell to 15% by week 3, 5% by week 5, and only 3% by week 8. Turns out that much of beans' bad rap may have grown out of short-term studies in the 1960s that did not account for our body's ability to adapt. In the long term, most people bulking up on high-fiber foods do not appear to have significantly increased problems with gas. When we first start incorporating more beans and foods higher in fiber in our diet, though, a little bit of extra flatulence, reads the Harvard Health Letter, could be an indication that you're eating the way you should! The indigestible sugars in beans that make it down to our colon may even function as prebiotics to feed our good bacteria and make for a healthier colon. Some of it may also just be in our heads. Preconceived notions about beans may be so strong that the expectation of flatulence from eating them may influence our perceptions of having gas. Studies show that when we eat a product that's labeled as having an ingredient that may cause intestinal distress, it causes more intestinal distress whether or not it actually contains that ingredient. In other words, the mere belief that we're eating something that causes us to pass more gas may cause us to perceive that we're passing more gas. Don't let the fartsebo effect prevent you from eating more healthfully. The Hispanic Paradox. The benefits of beans may help explain the so-called Hispanic paradox. Hispanic Americans, despite socioeconomic patterns that generally lead to worse health outcomes like disparities in education and healthcare, as well as high rates of poverty, tend to live longer than other ethnic groups in the United States. With lower risks of 9 out of the top 15 causes of death, notably including less heart disease and cancer, Hispanics have a 24% lower risk of premature death. For more on this topic, check out my video, c.nf/Hispanic. In a study of Mexican Americans, researchers found that, compared to other groups, that not only eat more beans, but also more fruits and vegetables, including tomatoes and corn. These healthy dietary patterns extend down to Central America too. After rice and beans, corn tortillas are the most commonly eaten food in the Costa Rican blue zone. They also eat more chili peppers. Can chilies spice up longevity? Pepper upper. The spicy compound in hot chilies can extend the life of fruit flies, but what about us? See my twin videos c.nf/spicy and c.nf/peppers for details. But basically, 4 out of 5 studies on spicy food and mortality found a significant decrease in death risk from any cause in people who ate more spicy chilies. I wrote an entire section on chili peppers in my Fat Burners chapter in How Not to Diet, detailing how cayenne pepper can counteract the metabolic slowing that accompanies weight loss and, as a bonus, accelerate fat burning. But the apparent longevity benefits of chili pepper consumption remain after controlling for body mass index. There are at least a half dozen no-salt-added hot sauces on the market. Even Tabasco is pretty low in sodium, though only the original flavor. Spin-off flavors have up to 5 times more salt. You can also add straight powdered chilies. I have different ones in shaker bottles for every occasion, including powdered adobo chilies, chipotle chilies, and crushed Thai bird's eye chilies for when I really want to kick up the heat.